proposals, and this is what he said this morning.
That isn't really what consumers need or want. What consumers need or want is what are their out-of-pocket costs. The negotiated rate between a hospital and an insurer or a physician and an insurer is not particularly relevant to the consumer.
So they're saying the consumers aren't paying these prices, so why would we post them? And that's similar to the reaction that drug companies have had when HHS has made similar proposals on pricing there.
Although, is it fair to see this as part of a bigger effort to deal with healthcare prices, drug prices, all of it writ large?
Yes, it is. And as I mentioned, the administration had put out these drug prices. They also really push for more transparency and less complexity in the pricing market so that people can see what their healthcare providers and their drug companies are charging their insurance companies, because that eventually gets into premiums. So the administration overall is trying to just make the market more transparent.
NPR's Allison Kojak, thank you.
Thanks, Mary Louise.
You're listening to All Things Considered.
I'm Lisa Mullins. We turn now to news here at WBUR. The station's general manager, Charlie Kravitz, is leaving. He has led WBUR since 2010. Boston University Senior Vice President of Operations Gary Nixa told the station at an all-staff meeting this afternoon Kravitz won't formally step down until the end of June, but will relinquish his day-to-day role at WBUR. For more now, we have Martha Biebinger, WBUR reporter, who's been covering the story. Hi, Martha.
Hi, Lisa.
What do we know about why Charlie Kravitz is stepping down?
Well, I'm not sure we have the full story yet, but what we do have is a joint statement from Boston University and from Charlie Kravitz. It says that now was an appropriate time for a transition. Appropriate because WBUR just opened CitySpace, this new cultural community venue that we have downstairs on Commonwealth Avenue, and because at the end of February there was a union vote, 73-3, in favor of forming a union among journalists at WBUR. VP at Boston University, Gary Nixa, spoke to the staff at noon today, Lisa. He said the decision that Charlie would be leaving came together over the last week.
These periods are ones where you reflect on how you're going to work going forward, and we agreed with Charlie that this was an appropriate time to make a leadership change as well, and he would move on to other opportunities.
And what is Charlie Kravitz saying?
We have not heard back from Charlie today. The joint statement says that he wants to pursue new opportunities. There are a lot of questions, though, about why Charlie was not at the meeting to announce the change of plans.
And you and I were both at the meeting. There were a lot of questions, as you said, about that. Some people were angry that he wasn't there, wondering, I think, if he had been kept away from the meeting. Why wasn't he there?
Let's start with what we heard from Gary Nixa.
Our decision was to make the transition quickly so that the management team is able to step up into new roles as quickly as possible.
But people in the meeting, Lisa, did make a point that it was unusual that Charlie wasn't there and that that's not the typical way that BU would have someone exit such a high-profile job. As far as we know, Charlie is not supposed to be here on a daily basis between now and when he is officially out at the end of June. And he will be continuing to advise the person who will be leading WBUR in the interim, who is News and Programming Director Sam Fleming.
Charlie Kravitz came on as general manager of WBUR in 2010. Could you tell us some of the highlights of his tenure? And we should say many of the staff members brought these up themselves today during the meeting.
They did. So we've already talked about the opening of CitySpace, which is a major project for WBUR. Here and Now, which is WBUR's midday show, went to 2 hours and became the NPR midday program under Charlie's tenure. He's added a number of staff. He's expanded the physical space, probably double. He's added an investigative and environmental unit. He has a diversity initiative that's underway. WBUR has just had the public launch of a capital campaign. So there are many reasons that people were very surprised to hear that Charlie is leaving.
So by those accounts, it seems his tenure has been largely successful. Was there a turning point, and if so, when?
I don't think there was a single turning point, but things started to turn when Charlie Kravitz and BU suspended Tom Ashbrook, who was the host of On Point, and then a few months later when Tom Ashbrook was let go. That triggered an internal investigation, lots of interviews with staff about the culture and climate at WBUR, communications and accountability that came out of the general manager's office. There was an action plan produced there, but there has not been a lot of action on that plan, and some staff members grew frustrated with the delay in that. That's one of the contributing factors to the union vote that we've just talked about.
And it was a vote for journalist content producers to join the SAG-AFTRA union. How much of a factor was that vote in Charlie's leaving?
Gary Nixa, who briefed the staff today, said that the union vote was one element in the change going on at the station, but he did not say that it was the reason that Charlie is leaving. Union organizers don't think the union vote was the tipping point either. Here's digital producer Allie Germaning, one of the employees who launched the organizing effort.
I think that we could have worked really well with Charlie. Everybody had worked with him for a very long time, and I think that there was hopes that we could be collaborative and negotiate in a contract. It's been a really tumultuous year for the station, that there's been a lot of changes here, and we were prepared to work with Charlie to negotiate a contract and continue to make WBUR a better place to work.
Martha, what is the broader reaction among employees of the station?
It is very broad, Lisa. I think many people are shocked, if not very surprised. There's sadness, there's some anger. There are people who had a difficult time working with him, as well as those who thought he was the great visionary. So some people think that the station may be headed in a direction that will take it to even greater heights, and others are quite worried about whether somebody else will be able to deliver on the vision that Charlie Kravitz had established for the station.
And so what happens now at the station?
Sam Fleming, who will be in the leadership day-to-day role here at WBUR, is hoping that he'll have lots of help from people at the station to pull together to continue a lot of the action plan that is in place.
Things are happening too fast in the media world. We can't stand still. We have to be strategic and keep evolving.
So Sam Fleming and Gary Nixa from BU have talked about pulling together a search committee very soon in the coming days for a nationwide look for a new general manager for WBUR.
WBUR's Martha Biebinger speaking to us about the news out today that WBUR's general manager Charlie Kravitz is stepping down. Thank you, Martha.
Thank you, Lisa.
We're funded by you, our listeners, and by GEICO, protecting people and their vehicles for over 75 years. GEICO is proud to offer car insurance and more to Massachusetts drivers, too. Additional information at geico.com or 1-800-947-AUTO. That's 1-800-947-AUTO. And AVFX, presenting 10 ways to add wow to your upcoming event, meeting, announcement, display, or exhibit at avfx.com/wow.
Make the most out of your car or boat even when it's time to replace it by donating it to WBUR. You'll be supporting the news, and you may be eligible for a tax deduction. Find out how at WBUR.org/cars. And thanks very much. In sports, New England Patriots players Trent Brown and Trey Flowers are saying goodbye after helping the Pats win this year's Super Bowl. ESPN reports that Brown is expected to sign with Oakland. Flowers is to head to Detroit. Celtics are looking for their fourth straight win tonight as they visit the LA Clippers. Jason Tatum will sit out the game tonight because of soreness in his shoulder. 10:30 game time. Bruins and Red Sox both have the day off today. And in the forecast, look for partly cloudy skies overnight tonight. Temperatures right about 30 degrees. Tomorrow, back with the sunshine. Mainly sunny skies tomorrow. Windy in the low 40s. Same for Wednesday. Sunny and mild. Highs about 43. Clouding up later in the day on Wednesday. Then some clouds for Thursday. Could reach 50, maybe 60 on Friday. It's 5:53.
WBUR supporters include Central Square Theater presenting Photograph 51, the story of the competitive chase to map the DNA molecule. Opens March 14th. More at centralsquaretheater.org.
Stopping climate change would mean a different way of urban living. In cities like Toronto, you can already see a carbon-free world emerging.
When we provide people with real choices, better choices, it can open up our minds. We can change our minds about what we thought was the only way to live.
How to live in a climate utopia. That's on the next morning edition from NPR News.
Tomorrow morning at 5 on 90.9 WBUR, Boston's NPR news station.
discovered tourist destinations. But the government wants to boost tourism by 20% this year. Its plan is to create 10 new Balis. While not everyone is on board with that, as
about an hour east of Bali by plane is one of the destinations the Indonesian government is pushing hard.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Komodo Airport, Labuan Bajo.
Labuan Bajo is the gateway to Komodo National Park, a cluster of islands about an hour away by boat. The park sits in between the Pacific Ocean to the north and the Indian Ocean to the south, and the largest island is the one that gives the park its name. And yes, there be dragons. Komodo dragons.
They are carnivores, so they eat any kind of meat.
And the only place to see them in the wild, in the world, is here on a handful of islands in the park. The world's largest living lizards can grow up to 10 feet long and weigh more than 150 pounds. And says park ranger Agus, who like many Indonesians, goes by just one name, they have a healthy appetite.
Monkey, deer, wild pig, water buffaloes, anything, even their own kind. The young one, the young Komodo.
The ones lounging around the ranger station on Komodo Island look like slightly bored refugees from Jurassic Park, but don't be fooled, says another ranger, Ramli. They can move incredibly fast, and their mouths, he says, are swimming with nasty bacteria and venom.
One bite, that's enough, because they have bacteria in their saliva. It's around 60 types of bacteria, and also they have a poison. So that stuff will take the prey down.
So they basically bite their prey, and then they just follow them until they die.
Yeah.
Including humans, though Ramli says the rangers aren't supposed to talk about that. Don't want to scare off the tourists, he says. But all the rangers carry a long forked stick to fend off dodgy dragons, just in case. But it's not just the dragons that are drawing increasing numbers of visitors to Komodo. More and more divers and snorkelers are coming to Komodo National Park as well, on liveaboard boats or on day trips from Labuan Bajo and elsewhere.
I expected it to be amazing. I don't think I expected it to be this amazing.
Divers like Allison Place, who came all the way from New Jersey.
It's unlike anything I've ever seen before. There's more fish and corals than I've ever seen in my entire life. And the manta rays are breathtaking. They're stunning.
Her husband, Joshua Squanavachi, says it's hands down the best diving he's ever done.
White-tip reef sharks, blue-spotted stingrays, marble rays. We've seen black-tip sharks, huge cuttlefish, jellyfish. We've seen all kinds of wrasse, giant sweet lips, all types of pufferfish. Just an amazing biodiversity underwater and above water.
But that biodiversity could be under threat, activists say, by the number of tourists now coming by the shipload. Including cruise ships bringing anywhere from 500 to 1,200 visitors per boat to Komodo Island. That's too many, says Ranger Ramli.
If cruise ship bring many people like that, they won't see one Komodo. They will see nothing, because dragon getting stressed. They are afraid of people when there are too many.
The central government's plan for 500,000 visitors to the area this year, he says, way too many. Back in Labuan Bajo, the head of the Provincial Tourism Office, Teresia Primadonna Rasmon, agrees.
I
don't think it's a good idea at all, she says. We need to figure out what the real carrying capacity of the park should be, both in terms of people coming to see the dragons and the divers, she says, so we can protect the ecosystem.
Jadi Labuan Bajo, jangan sampai Bali ya Bali dan Labuan.
We don't want to be another Bali, she says. Komodo is unique. It's not like any other tourist destination in Indonesia or the world, and she says we need to preserve it. For NPR News, I'm Michael Sullivan in Labuan Bajo.
As you begin your day, there's a way to get a quick download of some of the biggest stories we're following. Subscribe to NPR's daily news podcast, Up First. You'll get what you need to know in about 10 minutes.
You're listening to All Things Considered from NPR News.
Support for NPR comes from WBUR and from Indeed, used by over 3 million businesses for hiring, where employers can post jobs and use screener questions to build their short list of preferred candidates. Learn more at Indeed.com/hire. Creative Planning, an independent wealth management firm taking a financial planning-led approach to managing clients' investments, at creativeplanning.com/NPR. Creative Planning, Wealth Management Redefined. And from Constant Contact, their automation features let customers automatically send welcome and birthday emails, as well as autoresponders when users take an action. Learn more at ConstantContact.com.
This is 90.9 WBUR. Should be partly cloudy overnight tonight. Temperatures dropping to just about 30 degrees. Tomorrow, a nice sunny day, windy too. Highs just about 42 degrees. Wednesday should be sunny with gray skies later in the day. Temperatures in the mid-40s. Clouds dominate the day Thursday, but it should be milder at least. Highs around 40. Make that 50 degrees, and then even milder on Friday, pushing 60. In the Boston area now, 46 degrees at 1 before 6.
Funding for WBUR weather reports comes from NBC 10 Boston with first alert weather warnings, a new notification system sent when their weather team believes that severe weather could impact safety. NBC 10 Boston.
You're listening to 90.9 WBUR FM Boston,
92.7 WBUA Tisbury,
89.1 WBUH Brewster,
streaming at WBUR.org,
and live at CitySpace, Boston's new home for public conversation.
WBUR, Boston's NPR news station.
The president unveils a record $4.75 trillion budget. It includes more border wall funding and military spending and savings from deep cuts to domestic programs. Some of the reaction?
The savings here are very unlikely to materialize, but the big budget deficits that are going to continue to grow, those are.
This is All Things Considered. I'm Lisa Mullins. That story coming up. Also ahead, a former commander of the U.S. Northern Command says the mission of the U.S. military is complemented by diplomatic and development aid, and that aid should not be cut. The race is on for control of 5G wireless communications, and the stakes are high.
The countries that get this right will be the places where new ideas about new industries and new ways of making a living come from.
So far, China is in the driver's seat. These stories coming up. Marketplace starts at 6:30. It's now 1 past 6. News headlines are next.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Jack Spear. The White House says trade negotiations are still underway between the U.S. and China. NPR's Winsor Johnston reports the two nations have been locked in a tit-for-tat trade dispute for months as Washington continues to pressure Beijing to address what it calls unfair trade practices.
Negotiators are still addressing several concerns around Chinese practices, including industrial subsidies, market access, and intellectual property rights. White House Press Secretary Sarah Sanders says while the two sides have made progress, there's still work to be done.
The president's going to make sure whatever deal we get is in our best interest, that it's fair and reciprocal trade, that it protects our intellectual property, and that it actually has safeguards to make sure that the Chinese follow through with whatever commitments that they make.
Sanders says a date for a trade summit between President Trump and Chinese President Xi Jinping has not been set. Winsor Johnston, NPR News, Washington.
British Prime Minister Theresa May rushed for 2 days of face-to-face talks with EU leaders as she tries to salvage her Brexit deal from a parliamentary defeat. May announced she'll be meeting with European Commission President Jean-Claude Juncker. May has also been pressing the EU for changes to the original divorce deal since lawmakers in Parliament defeated the agreement in January. But so far, the bloc is unwilling to reopen the agreement. Britain is due to leave the EU in just 18 days. The Pentagon confirmed today it's moving forward on developing and manufacturing a ground-launched cruise missile that's been banned for more than 3 decades by an arms deal with Russia. As NPR's David Wellner reports, both the U.S. and Russia announced last month they're abandoning the Intermediate-Range Nuclear Forces Treaty.
The Pentagon says the Department of Defense will begin fabricating components to support testing of the previously banned cruise missile, but that this will be for a conventional rather than a nuclear weapon. Separately, U.S. Undersecretary of State for Arms Control Andrea Thompson tells a conference in Washington this is due to the U.S. moving out of the INF treaty.
The Department of Defense can start those research and development actions that they haven't done at all because of the WBUR treaty compliance. So DOD is looking at that for next steps. the R&D, what does it mean, the fielding of systems, and so they've just now commenced that.
The Pentagon says the missile development is reversible should Russia comply with the INF treaty by early August. David Wallner, NPR News, Washington.
Authorities in Ethiopia, China, and Indonesia grounded all of their Boeing 737 MAX 8 jetliners following Sunday's crash of an Ethiopian Airlines plane that killed 157 people. Investigators say they're still trying to determine what caused the crash. The same model that went down in Indonesia last year killed 189 people. Investigators have recovered the plane's flight data and cockpit voice recorders. On Wall Street today, the Dow closed up 200 points. To NPR.
This is 90.9 WBUR in Boston. I'm Lisa Mullins. The MBTA will increase subway and commuter rail fares in July. Today, T leaders approved a roughly 6% fare hike. Fares for individual bus rides will stay the same as they are now. There will be no increase for discounted fares for students, seniors, and people with disabilities. The man charged with the kidnapping and death of a 23-year-old Lynn mother is being held without bail. Lewis Coleman appeared before a federal judge magistrate this afternoon in Boston. WBUR's Fred Tice reports.
Coleman stood before the magistrate in an orange jumpsuit. Federal prosecutors are charging.
You pay attention. With so much at stake.
Seas are rising and chronic flooding will be the new normal.
You navigate, you listen, you keep an ear out. You pay attention, and so do we. We tell the stories of our time every day.
In the 26th day of testimony and on the 139th witness, Shahar Tsarnaev wept.
We unearth what would otherwise stay hidden.
There's just a lot of hate in this world, and that day, for that hour, we were humans.
Across the street.
The Red Sox have won the World Series.
And around the globe.
It's here and now.
This is modern love.
This is WBUR's All Things Considered.
This is only a game.
This is On Point. This is Radio Boston.
On air, online, on demand, and on stage.
I'm Jack Lepiars. Welcome to WBUR CitySpace.
Always looking forward, paying attention, and knowing that your story is one of our stories.
Good morning. I'm Bob Oates.
I'm Lisa Mullins.
I'm Meghna Chakrabarti.
I'm Jeremy Hobson.
This is 90.9 WBUR, Boston.
Welcome everyone. Thank you all for coming. We are so glad to see a full house here. So I want to thank you. Welcome to CitySpace. We've been open for about a week here. It's our home for public conversation in Boston, and we're excited to talk about a really important topic. I want to say, we wouldn't be here if you didn't support our journalism. And I think CitySpace is a physical reminder of your support for our journalism. So we are very grateful for that. And we're hoping that we can take our journalism and our on-air and online conversations and bring them here, source for the community. So thank you again. We have a lot of folks with us to talk about a very complicated topic tonight, gun control and gun violence and Massachusetts violence. How did we get here? Why are we said to have such a low rate of gun deaths? What steps should we take going forward? And we're going to try to get a lot of these big issues into 2 hours with our very esteemed guests this evening. So I'm going to introduce everyone rather quickly. Sandro Galea is Boston University Dean of the School of Public Health. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
Also, Massachusetts House Speaker Robert DeLeo. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
John Rosenthal is founder of Stop Handgun Violence. Thank you, John.
Thank you.
Attorney General Maura Healey, thanks to you. Governor Baker is with us as well. Governor, thank you so much for coming.
Thanks.
We also have some folks in the audience who we will be speaking with tonight. The Boston Globe's Nestor Ramos is with us. He's going to tell us about his editorial project on gun control, and we will also hear from some student activists who are in our audience tonight. And we have state lawmakers who have come to see the event tonight, so I just want to give a little shout out to you and thank you for coming. We have Representatives China Tyler, Liz Miranda, and Dan Cullinane. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you. And so I want to make sure that folks also know how they will be able to submit questions, because we are going to be taking questions during the conversation tonight, and also we will have a dedicated question and answer period. So there is something called Slido, which you can see up on the screen up there. And if you go onto your phone.com and you put in that password with the hashtag, you can submit a question that I will be able to scroll through up here on the laptop, and we will be able to ask the panelists if you feel that you have a question you would like answered going forward. Also on Twitter. We are taking questions via Twitter, and you can use the hashtag CitySpaceQA. This is also on YouTube tonight. WBUR CitySpace is the address on YouTube, and the channel is Tackling Gun Violence. So lots of ways to ask questions, but also after we get through part of the discussion, we will be taking questions from the audience and that microphone right there as well. So first, I want to start by saying, what do the numbers say? So what do the numbers tell us? What does the research tell us? Sandra Galea, what do we know about the numbers? And there's a brand new study published in the British Medical Journal today, I believe, regarding some numbers and some research on guns. Why don't you tell us what they said?
Sure. So let me, first of all, thank you. Thank you for having us, and thank you everybody for coming. I just want to clear a couple of things. So gun violence is an epidemic. It's an epidemic by any standard. It has been so for the past 25, 30 years in this country. So just to ground it a little bit in some numbers. So on any given day, about 340 people are shot in this country, and about almost 100 die. From those who die, just to sort of orient us all, about 60 are suicides. That means they kill themselves. Another 35 are killed, and the rest are a mix of accident and unknown. Just one thing to note when I said those numbers. I said about 350 people are shot and about 100 die. That means that for every person who dies, there are 2 to 3 people who are injured. And we know that injury from gun violence results in substantial hospitalization and costs that far exceed other forms of injury. And in our public discussion, lately we've been talking a lot more about gun deaths. And to my mind, we do not talk enough about the fact that about 2 to 3 times as many people who die are injured. And you seldom see that in the public conversation. So that's fact one. Now, because we're human, sometimes we're a little bit inured to data that say number of people who die. So something that touches a little bit more is perhaps think about children. So every day, almost 50 children are shot by a gun, and almost 10 die. Now, you may say 10 children, is that a lot of children? Well, 5 children die from cancer every day. So almost twice as many kids die from guns as die from cancer every day. And that, I always find that focuses the mind. And put another way, a kid is shot every 30 minutes, and a kid dies every 3 hours from guns in this country. Now, on a year-on-year basis, about 40,000 people die from guns in 2017, which is more than the number of people who die from motor vehicle accident. Now that's raw numbers. Now just to narrow down for a second, you cannot have a conversation about guns in this country without talking about race, because gun violence and the consequences of gun violence are racialized. So firearm homicide is the leading cause of death among African Americans, blacks, age 1 to 44. Although African American blacks are 13% of the US population, they suffer about 25% of all firearm deaths and 54% of all firearm homicide. So this is a racially patterned issue and has been for decades. That's one dimension. And then one more dimension, which I know that Attorney General has been very vocal on, is the relationship between guns and issues like domestic violence. So just to give some numbers on this, guns are used in about 2/3 of guns are used in about 2/3 of those. When there's a gun involved, domestic violence is 12 times more likely to become fatal than when there is no gun involved. And abused women are 5 times more likely to die if there's a gun in the house than if there isn't a gun in the house. So, all of this paints a picture of an epidemic that has been really unchanging for many decades, increasing a little bit in the past couple of years. Now, as was mentioned in the introduction, I serve as a Dean of School of Public Health. And, as recently as 5 to 10 years ago, you would hear the argument all the time, why is somebody who's in public health engaged in the issue of guns? So I just want to clarify this misconception right from the beginning. And I'll quote former Surgeon General David Satcher, who said, if guns were not a health issue, why do so many people die from them? And to my mind, that really captures it. People are dying, people are injured by guns, which makes it a public health issue. And when something's a public health issue, then I think it requires a health solution. It requires a solution that says, what is it that we know that can minimize the consequences of guns and gun violence, and what can we do about it? And then before I turn it over to the next speaker, I think Massachusetts, which is really how we convened this panel, has really been a leader on this, and I think the country can learn a lot from Massachusetts. So in the continental US, Massachusetts has the lowest firearm death rate for mainland United States. In 2017, our death rate was 3.7 per 100,000. Just to ground it, that is 6 times lower than the highest state, which in 2017 was Alabama. 6 times lower. And there has been analyses, which you'll hear about in a second, about we can save up to 27,000 lives a year in the country if all states adopted the Massachusetts approach. So the summary from my numbers synthesis is, number one, a lot of people die from guns. Number two, those people extend to all ages, affect people like children who we seldom sort of attribute their own autonomy to actually deserve or own guns. And number three, it's immensely racialized. And number four, guns and the presence of guns complicate and worsen many other social problems. Then we should be able to do better.
But what about the folks who say, yes, Massachusetts has certainly a low rate of gun-related deaths, but is it relative, right? I mean, the country as a whole has a huge gun problem. And what is the main thing that Massachusetts has done to have that low rate, but how could Massachusetts be better?
That's a great question. The problem with that question is that there is no one main thing from my perspective. I actually think that what Massachusetts has done, and people like Speaker DeLeo can speak to this, has enacted a rich network of provisions and policies and guidances that collectively lower the risk of guns causing harm. And the literature is very clear on this, although many have published papers, I've published papers, this versus another. The bottom line is that more guns result in more gun-related harm. And the question is, what is it in what context that lowers the availability of guns? And that's just a complicated question that varies from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. What Massachusetts has done is it has made it harder to have more guns readily available. And it has done that through a bipartisan approach that has lowered the number of guns available to everybody.
John Rosenthal, if we stick with the national picture for a moment, would you say that that is what we do in Massachusetts, what we've done, and why Massachusetts has that rate nationally?
Yes, that's the short answer. And I want to thank Bob Brown and BU for having us. This is a really important conversation. And, you know, if we don't feel safe in our communities, and we certainly don't have the gene to bury our children and never be the same, these are the kinds of conversations that we need to have. And Massachusetts has proven that gun laws save lives. And we've done it in an unprecedented, bipartisan way. We are the safest state in the nation when it comes to gun violence. We have reduced the rate of gun deaths in Massachusetts since 1994 by over 40%. We're an urban state with the lowest gun death rate in the nation, and we've proven the NRA's worst nightmare. Gun laws save lives, and you don't have to ban most guns in order to do it. So how have we done this? We changed the conversation, and many of you probably remember our billboards on the Mass Pike. And after every billboard, we filed another bill dealing with one of the issues. I mean, if you want to reduce injuries and deaths from guns, what do? You have to regulate this inherently dangerous product, where in America, toy guns are regulated and real guns. And you need to really regulate the constituent groups. I'm a gun owner. We need to regulate gun owners, dealers, gun manufacturers, and law enforcement, just like we do with the auto industry. It's an inherently dangerous product. And for automobiles, you know, there's training, there's licensing, there's renewable licensing, there are safety features, and guess what? If they don't even put a seatbelt in your car, you can sue them for damages. But with respect to real guns, again, unlike toy guns have a little red dot at the end of the barrel. That's to tell police it's a toy. Real guns that result in 100 deaths a day, 250 injuries, 0 federal regulations on how they are made and marketed, number one, and you can't sue the gun industry because Congress gave them immunity from lawsuits, not for toy guns, but for real guns. So we created this educational campaign with the biggest billboard in America, where 250,000 people drive every day. We enacted here in Massachusetts, believe it or not, the very first in the nation consumer protection standards for firearms and for the firearm industry. We did that because Smith & Wesson was the largest handgun maker in America. 90% of gun injuries and deaths that happen today will be with a handgun. And Smith & Wesson cannot sell a gun in this state, nor can Springfield Arms or any other gun manufacturer in Massachusetts. They can't sell the guns unless they meet minimum safety standards and marketing standards, and that is unique to Massachusetts. Background checks for all gun sales. I mean, think about it. This is insane public policy that 32 states don't require a criminal background check to buy an easily concealed handgun or a military-style weapon with a large capacity ammunition magazine. We give police 13 to 17 weapons. Congress gives 30 to 100 round magazines to criminals without an ID or a background check in 32 states, including Maine, New Hampshire, and Vermont. Imagine what our firearm fatality rate would be if our neighboring states had the same firearm fatality rate and the same gun laws as Massachusetts. So, background checks for all gun sales, police chief discretion, and renewable licensing, just like you do for automobiles. Safety training and safe storage if the gun isn't in your direct control. And I can be, if I leave my firearm loaded and unlocked, and I leave the house, and a kid gets access to that gun, I am liable. That's a pretty big stick for me to lock that gun. And what good do you need? You know, you don't, you know, a gun that is in your house loaded and unlocked, how's that helping you? But it's certainly going to help a breaking and entering criminal. It's certainly going to help a teenager who's distressed or a toddler that's curious. And we are one of the few states in the nation that ban military-style assault weapons and large-capacity ammunition magazines because they are the common denominator in all the mass shootings. And ironically, it was a AR-15 made by Smith & Wesson here in Massachusetts that was used at Parkland, was used at Aurora, Colorado, and has been used in a ton of other horrific mass shootings. And that weapon, because of our consumer protection, can't even be sold in this state. So we have simply looked at how gun owners, dealers, and by the way, gun dealers have to operate, believe it or not, out of a regular store separate from their home or car trunk or backpack, which is perfectly legal in other states. So we simply regulate gun owners, gun dealers, gun manufacturers, and law enforcement. We've driven down the preventable gun deaths. We're the leader in the nation for doing it, and we've proven the NRA's worst nightmare: gun laws save lives. And I just want to take a moment because in 1994, when violence, which is 850,000 dead Americans ago from preventable gun violence, our dream as gun owners and business people were to change the conversation around gun violence. You don't have to ban guns in order to prevent most gun violence. Change laws and make Massachusetts a model for the nation. And guess what, folks? We're there. We have a lot more to do, but I just want to take a moment. You live in the safest state in the nation because of the leadership on this panel, and we owe them so much, including a huge round of applause.
Well, Governor Baker, there's a great transition for you, right? I wonder what you think about Massachusetts standing right now, and I don't mean to be a naysayer here, but what do we do about some of the racial disparities that Dean Galea talked about, and how we address some of those going forward?
Is that direct?
Governor Baker.
Well, I think the first thing you got to start with is data. And one of the biggest problems we have with a lot of issues around gun violence generally is the lack of data that's available to people. We actually are part of this regional group that submits data from Massachusetts to the Rockefeller Center. The Rockefeller Center takes it from a whole bunch of different states and then spins it into a variety of reports on a number of issues. And And I think one of the things that has proven over time, especially if you start to think about this as a public health issue, is you can use data to change policy. And there are a lot of really good examples of where in Massachusetts, treating data as a public health issue, if you believe you have a public health issue, can change decision-making, policy, and outcomes. And probably the best example of that, and a bunch of people in this room won't be old enough to remember this, but the Boston Globe did a series of reports a few years ago, actually not a few, many, where they took a look at where we had infant mortality issues around the Commonwealth. Total public health issue. And they came back with a report that was called, I think at the time, there was zip codes, and there were certain zip codes where the infant mortality rate was dramatically higher than it was in other parts of the same communities. And that data then translated into changes in a whole series of initiatives that made a big difference with respect to dropping and improving the disparity in the infant mortality rate. And when you talk about gun data, you're talking in some respects about the same thing, which is how can you take data and turn it into policy that makes a difference. Now, one of the things I think would make a big difference in this space is data around guns or injured people in Massachusetts, especially in communities of color that aren't bought here. One of the biggest problems, and John touched on it, that we have is for all the work that people in Massachusetts do to regulate and associated with purchasing, owning, and qualifying to purchase a weapon. There are states around us that don't play by the same rules. And I would love to know how many of the guns that end up creating havoc in many of our communities, especially in instances and circumstances that involve communities of color. I'd love to know how many of those guns came from somewhere else, because my guess is it's probably
more than that.
A lot.
Right. What do we know? Do we know from our researchers here? What do we know about the guns that come from out of state that are involved? Attorney General, do you know?
It's more than half. So the governor makes a great point. I mean, one of the issues we face here is the problem with the high number of guns coming into our state, and more than half of the guns used in crime here in the state come from other states, some neighboring states, but also states elsewhere, and that's a huge issue.
And so what can policymakers here do about that?
Well, I think everybody showing up tonight, continuing to talk to their delegation in D.C. We need to have some basic standards in place when it comes to background checks and to really normalize across this country some basic steps that don't interfere with anyone's Second Amendment rights, but do properly recognize this as the public health issue that this is. So I think that's really, really important that we see action at the congressional level. I think also we need action at the congressional level to deal with something that the governor just mentioned, research. We can do and should do research here. But the Centers for Disease Control is prohibited from effectively studying gun violence and how to address or mitigate or reduce gun violence, which is outrageous. So I think those two things need to happen, and certainly we need to do everything we can to deal with trauma and violence. I think this in part gets to issues of racial disparity too, and the absolutely shocking and sad statistic of the disproportionate effect by way of race. And some of this deals with lack of resources to deal with education, jobs, mental health. Trauma begets trauma, violence begets violence in all forms, I think, no matter where it's occurring. But I think what we can do here is look for opportunities to address that intensely in some of our communities. But national work needs to happen.
Right.
Deb, the primary crime gun source states for Massachusetts are Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont, Georgia, and Florida. Mm-hmm. All states with no background check requirements for private gun sales, including for military-style assault weapons. And 2/3 of all gun deaths, as we heard, are suicides. You could fill Fenway Park up 3 times over with 110,000 kids killed, and every 3 hours in America, with kids killed by gun violence. That's a lot of people, and half of Fenway would have non-white faces, and the other half would have white faces, because the majority of suicides are suburban and rural, and the majority of homicides are urban. So this is affecting all of us, and it's just an example of bad public policy when you're not regulating an inherently dangerous product has a very disastrous public health outcome.
If I can follow on that
Yes,
maybe a little bit,
Mr.
please,
Speaker.
Deb. First of all, I also want to mention Representatives Linsky and Decker, who are here, by the way, who filed a lot of the legislation before us. I'd have to say, as Speaker, as a state representative, this issue, I think, probably came out more in the limelight than ever before when we had the number of massive killings that we had. I think probably Newtown in Connecticut was probably one of the major incidences that I think caused more of the discussion. But one of the things that I learned after, whether it was Newtown or Parkland or whatever, was that if you take a look in whatever news media you get your information, which I'm sure this crowd is probably BUR.
Hope so.
Right? Okay. Wherever it is that you get your information, you will see that it's not just about the massive killings. That every day or every other day or however numbers may be, you know, there is someone somewhere who's getting shot and killed as a result of gun violence. And that's why I think that we have to look probably a little bit further than just some of those massive killings that we're talking about. For instance, in 2017, there was double the amount of homicides of young people in Boston than the year before. Okay? John sort of has alluded to the fact the disproportionate number of people of color who are affected by gun violence. So I think as we're looking to study more and more into this issue, those are the types of things that we have to look into. For instance, I can tell you a couple of things besides the three major bills that we have passed over the past, some odd years relative to gun violence. That just last year, for instance, Representative Vargas from Haverhill filed a bill for some $10 million for gun violence prevention pilot for youth, which we passed. It was Representative Tyler filed a resolution to recognize gun violence, youth gun violence, as a public health epidemic. I think those are the important things that we have to do. And right now, I think we have to look at what are the root causes. What are the root causes for this gun violence, especially here that we look at it in Massachusetts? And I think we have to expand our prevention efforts, whether it's addressing behavioral health, as we have talked about before, or the socioeconomic inequity in our urban communities. So although I think we have taken some great steps, and I am very, very proud working with all of my colleagues here in what we have done in Massachusetts, we still have some other places that we have to attend to.
Right, and we're gonna talk about that a little bit. You didn't mention the red flag legislation, which was recently filed, where someone could, the courts would have the authority to take away a gun if someone was deemed to be dangerous. And Governor, you signed that. I wonder, we just saw research about how many guns have been taken away. Is it pretty much what you expected? And do you think that the law is working as intended, or do you think more needs to be done there, particularly in terms of follow-up when someone is declared too dangerous to have a weapon?
Well, first, by the way, Representatives Decker and Linsky were the two ball carriers on that one in the House, which is why they're probably sitting in the front row. But the two things I would say about this, first of all, what was most interesting to me about that whole discussion when it first started was the chiefs of police, who are sort of the gatekeepers for all intents and purposes in Massachusetts around getting a license to carry in the first place, were one of the first groups to say, you know what, this would be helpful. All right, so you had the people who are already the ones that in many cases gave people permission to access a firearm in Massachusetts, came out relatively quickly after that debate began on that and said this would be a good thing to have this judicial process in place that people could pursue before we actually acted on that. And I think their voices in this and in many other issues around the management of gun legislation is a loud one and an important one. And the second thing I would say is the thing that didn't surprise me that much was on all the cases so far that have been brought, none of them involved what people were most worried about, I think, during the debate, was that people would use it as a weapon. You know, somebody would accuse somebody who's arguing with somebody about somebody else, something else, would use this as a mechanism to push somebody in a corner about something that had nothing to do with it. And so far, there's no evidence that that's happened, which is, I think, the best part of sort of the data collected so far. But again, it falls into the category, there are only, I'm gonna say 15 or 16 states that have ERPO laws. That's a pretty small number, and they're interesting because some of them are blue and some of them are red. Indiana has one, Florida has one, Vermont has one. I mean, there's a fair amount of variety there, and that would seem to me to be a pretty easy thing. And some of them had them for a very long time. It would seem to me that would be a pretty easy thing for a lot of states to adopt just based on the experience of other states, which I would like to see more do, to tell you the truth.
You have a question from Slido here. It says, I agree with the governor that more data are needed to make better decisions. How does Washington justify banning the CDC from studying gun violence? So I'm wondering, would you be the person to answer that? Would Senator Dean DeLeo be the person to answer that?
I could probably take a shot.
Just letting you know they agree with you, Governor.
Why don't you go ahead, Speaker, and then I'll add to what you're going to say.
You know, I can tell you that if you take a look at gun violence and you take a look at gun possession, and you take a look at what happened, for instance, what we've done here in Massachusetts and how proud that we are about what we've done here in Massachusetts, I can tell you, as Speaker at the time, in terms of trying to get the votes necessary to pass this legislation, was not an easy task. And that's in Massachusetts. And as I speak to my other colleagues around the country and the other speakers, I can tell you, I don't see being passed in some states, in many states, like we have here in Massachusetts. And it was fascinating to me because as we filed the legislation, and John, you know, because I used to call you early in the morning and late at night, I couldn't believe the difficulty. The gun lobby was very loud. Yet you would read about polling, and polling was amazing. It would go anywhere from 75 to 25 to 90-10 opposed or with us on this issue. Yet the gun lobby was so strong, even here in Massachusetts, that I would hear from my fellow colleagues in the House who would tell me, you know, this is one of the toughest votes we've ever had to take. This could be tougher than marriage equality, for instance. And I said, you got to be kidding me, first of all. Yeah, you know, but the pressure that they were receiving, although they were only in the minority, I mean the pro-gun folks, they were by far the loudest. So I think that although some of the latest statistics we're getting from other states in terms of what's going on, other states coming on board with what Massachusetts has done, I think has been very, very gratifying. You know, what would happen in Washington under a Trump administration, with all due respect, I don't know if I'd want to take, you know, any bets on that happening all too soon.
So let me
Can I just follow up on this question about polling and the lobby and all the rest? I mean, maybe I've been hallucinating, but I've seen a bunch of studies and a bunch of surveys in which gun owners have basically like 80-20 support universal background checks.
Yes.
I'm not hallucinating.
No,
that's true.
No, that's correct.
Well, I mean, in some respects, I think there's a disconnect going on here between what even folks who are part of the gun owning community are looking for and what's being portrayed by some of the folks that are advocating theoretically on their behalf.
And we hit a tipping, sorry, Sandra, but we hit a tipping point in the midterms. You know, we saw, you know, Sandy Hook, Pulse nightclub. I mean, 550 people shot in Las Vegas, and Massachusetts was the only state that banned the bump stock. I mean, that was in seconds. And then Parkland with the students, it tipped. And for the first time in 25 years and 850,000 dead since I've been at this, it was a safe voting issue in the midterms, and it helped flip the House.
But if we...
Yeah, let me just make 4 quick points, actually, which build on what the Governor, Speaker, and the Attorney General said. Number one, I'll start with the Governor's last point. The data are very clear on this, survey after survey after survey, that gun owners, non-gun owners, Republicans, Democrats, they all favor some fairly common sense gun law. So I think the point that the Speaker is making about a disproportionate impact of one gun lobby is a real point, and it's actually, it's a difficult point to address in polite conversation. As a researcher, it is. As a researcher, I have twice been targeted by the NRA, and this is to Boston University's great credit that they've always stood by me, and it's actually quite terrifying. I'm not a politician like you all are. I'm not used to people attacking me. Which no, I'm being honest.
You're a professor.
It's come on. It's a much milder form of attack, Governor. So I do think that there is a disconnect between what people actually want and what happens with lobby. That's point A. Point B, Governor, about your point about data. The one data point that's very clear is that gun violence is the least studied compared to all other large forms of death in the country. So we actually have data that show how little we study this. Point 3, to Speaker's point, the reason the CDC hasn't been funding this is because of something which was called the Dickey Amendment, which was put in 1995. What's interesting is that Jay Dickey, who was a congressman at the time, never intended it to do what it did, and actually recanted before he passed away. And then the Attorney General mentioned mental health. I just don't want to lose that point. We actually do not have a good measure of the full scope of the consequences of gun violence. So for example, we know that injured victims are going to have a substantial burden of mental illness, and we just don't know how much it is. We know that their families will, and they don't know how much it is. And fifth point, last point, because the Speaker mentioned mass killings. We pay attention to this issue every time there's a horrific event, like Parkland or Las Vegas. We need to remember these events are responsible for less than 1% of all gun-related deaths. So the public conversation needs to happen around these events, paying due respect to these events, but also recognizing that we have many multiples of these events happening every day.
If I just could add something, and this is just based on my short time in politics. But first of all, an observation, Congress does not always work on behalf of the people elected, who elected them. And I've seen this play out in this very issue because, of course, the overwhelming statistics are in favor of some sort of reform. But the NRA and its lobbying power is so, and has been so strong. Now, the good news for all of us is that for the first time ever, NRA contributions have gone down, and NRA contributions to candidates have gone down. Mark Kelly, of course, our good friend in Arizona, is going to challenge for the Senate seat and will likely be the next senator of Arizona as a result. But the NRA, we know it from all of the laws here, whether it's the chiefs getting to, and I'm looking at Fred Ryan here from the great town of Arlington, the chiefs getting to make the call on who gets the license to carry, our storage requirements, the law that's, keeps guns out of the hands of those with a domestic violence history, our ERPO law, certainly the assault weapons ban, all of these challenged by the NRA, and all of these successfully defended, by the way, and still on the books here in court. So that's the game the NRA plays. We need to continue to stay strong in this state and be a model for other states. But, my money is on the people like Sam and Vickiana and the activists in the room who are holding those seeking office accountable, because ultimately this is a political problem. There is no good answer to the question of why the CDC doesn't study what is serious and significant public health issue. There is no good answer. And until and unless we get the right people in place, we're on the move, we're just not going to see help out of Washington.
So Massachusetts played a huge role in that. So it's important for people to know. And we did it on a bipartisan basis. But the CDC had $2.5 million allocated for 7 states to study injuries and deaths from firearms. Massachusetts was one of those states. And they reported out that states with tougher gun laws had lower rates of gun violence and gun death than states with lax gun laws. And when they reported it out, the NRA and their supporters in Congress said, oh, that's a gun control report, no more funding for that. And Governor Cellucci funded here in Massachusetts. So we are one of the few states, and this was back in '98, one of the few states that is able to look at the data thanks to the bipartisanship and common sense, in our leadership.
I want to get to a question here that was submitted through Slido again. It says, in spite of our laws, too many people in urban areas are dying by illegally trafficked guns. What's the one thing that could be done or what would you propose to be done to reduce urban gun violence? Speaker, can we start with you?
Yeah, I think it relates to what I said earlier. I think we have to talk about taking a look in terms of what's going on in terms of what are the root causes. And that's what I'm talking about beyond the discussion about the mass killings and whatnot. So when I talked about the socioeconomic inequities that are here, I think that when we talk about again, the fact about the fact that teenage shootings, you had double, I think, in 17 than you had in the year before. Most importantly, one of the things that we're looking at right now and talking about is behavioral health issues as well. So I think that one of the most important things, especially relative to the urban issue, is that these are the things that we really, I think, are our next step in terms of what we can do to prevent violence, within the city. And the other thing, sort of alluded to, I think, earlier by my colleagues here, was the fact that we really need a national action to be taken. John had mentioned some of the other New England states that don't have the gun laws that we have here. And those are the guns that are getting into the city, and those are the guns that are killing people here in Massachusetts. When I first talked about that, it was by hope. When people saw what we did here in Massachusetts, then that hopefully, just hopefully, people in other states would say, you know what they're doing works. The statistics are alarming in terms of the least number of deaths here in Massachusetts as a result of gun violence. Other states should follow suit. That really hasn't happened. Although I will say, as a result of what has happened, in particular with some of the advocates, in particular from Parkland, that they have gotten, the word seems to be spreading across the country now, more than I've ever seen it spread before. So hopefully, when we study the socioeconomic inequities, when we take a look in terms of how we can spread the word that gun violence can be prevented with proper laws, hopefully those two things, I think, will help us.
Attorney General Healy, what would you say to that?
He's not going to like my answer because I don't think there's one thing. I mean, ultimately, I'd have a big magnet that would suck up all the illegal guns that are out there in our neighborhoods. It's probably unconstitutional. I probably couldn't defend that.
Might be, maybe a little.
But look, I think,
probably get a few automobiles with it.
And God knows what else. But, look, I think tremendous work is happening right now in communities. We got to support that. The after-school programming, the funding for education, those who are actually teaching our young people and talking to young people in real ways about the consequences of being a straw buyer or a straw purchaser. This is all important stuff. Giving kids opportunities, it's really, really important. So it does get to some of the foundational socioeconomic stuff we've been talking about. I think it's important to recognize that we've got 300 million guns all over this country floating around. We got a lot of guns. And we have a real problem with, guns coming into this state from elsewhere. And that, we ban Glocks, but a lot of Glocks are turning up in crimes here. And they're not, sold here legally. So I do think some of the national reforms are absolutely imperative. And I think we've got to be talking with our communities too, listening to our communities, because they are best situated to tell us what young people need. And I say young people, it's not limited to young people, gun violence, but you look at what's happening between the ages of 18 and 32, 12, we have shot spotters in different cities across the Commonwealth, and the shots go off, and there are kids, 12, 13, 14 years old, with guns in their backpacks and in their pockets, and that's just wrong.
So can I just add I'm going to pitch a little bit on our budget that's currently before your Ways and Means Committee, Mr. Speaker. We have funding in there for a bunch of things. One of which is a pretty significant increase in the Safe and Successful Youth Initiative, which is one of my thank you. It's like one of my favorite programs, and it's basically targeted towards supporting and primarily kids that are somewhere between the ages of sort of 18 and 25, just about the group that you were talking about, General. And it's been proven in a whole bunch of communities to work extremely well, and I think we should do more with that. We also had 2 commissions. One was a black commission, the other was a Latino commission. They made about $26 million worth of recommendations around education, job training, ESOL programming, and a variety of other initiatives, some of which were targeted to young adults, some of which were targeted to the K-12 system. And I think, you know, we need to make those kinds of investments. You know, we need to be serious about them. We need to invest the ones that work. The SSYI stuff is a home run. I'd love to see you guys, in fact, I'd love to see you guys do more than what we did on that one. But I do think there's a big piece of this is about making investments in these communities that are going to help people come up with alternatives. And the other thing I will say, and I'll push this one a little bit, you know, we haven't been able to get all of the New England states into this regional data collection collaborative. Mm-hmm. If you guys have data on sort of Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont, around some of this gun stuff, I'd be happy to go talk to some of my colleagues north of me about that and see if we can't figure out some way to get them more involved in trying to keep that stuff out of here.
Let me just say, we've also done some stuff, as you know, Governor, you know, in last year's budget relative to $10 million relative to the gun violence and, you know, in youth. We've also, I can tell you, you know, speaking from the House's perspective, you know, agreed to, you know, with the Senate as well, you know, relative to what we've done relative to safe and supportive schools.
Yep.
So I you know, I hear you in terms of, you know, where we go next.
I was mostly just taking
lobbying.
Of an opportunity.
Yeah.
I was lobbying. That's exactly right.
So, Deb, it's critical. I mean, what the governor's talking about, the speaker's talking about is absolutely necessary, and it's great public policy, and it's going to make a huge difference in our poorest neighborhoods, because those are neighborhoods where you can get a gun within minutes that's been trafficked here from out of state, and good luck trying to find a job. So we need universal background checks for all gun sales. And you got to understand, I mean, we have this epidemic of gun violence, 40,000 people a year dying. That is more Americans dying from gun violence in this country since 1968 than all U.S. servicemen killed in all foreign wars combined. And there's no background check. And as a gun owner, I can tell you, I resent the fact that I can pass a background check, so I go to a gun store who has to run a background check. But literally 50% of the millions of guns sold each year are sold to people who can't pass a background check knowingly and go to the 32 states that don't require it. And to take it, I mean, how extreme this is, how extreme bad public policy leads to bad public health outcomes with guns. I have hunted. And I have a shotgun. And when I hunt, I got to get a license to hunt. And when I hunt deer, I'm limited to 5 rounds. When I hunt duck, 3 rounds to protect the duck and deer population. When you hunt humans, no limit. That is unconscionable public policy.
Let me just, can I add something to that?
Certainly.
You know, I agreed with the governor earlier about the fact that we need data, and I think it's very clear we need data, but I want to make sure that in the conversation we do not mix needing data with not knowing anything. And the data are very clear. I want to be clear on this. Data are very clear that the states which have the richest, densest network of gun laws and in many forms, have the lowest rate of gun deaths and gun injuries. Now, there's a lot of open scientific questions. I'm a professor, so I can study this for the next 40 years. That's fine. But that's what they pay me to do, which is great. But from natural experiments, places like Missouri, which repealed key laws and saw an increase in homicides and suicides, places like Connecticut, which actually implemented key laws, saw a decrease in homicides and suicides. We know that while we may argue about which policies, which laws, etc., what really makes a difference in Massachusetts is the fact that we actually have a number of things in place, a number of programs in place, like some of the ones that the governor mentioned, and together they make a difference. Unfortunately, it makes it hard to come up with a soundbite that says, this is the one thing you need to do. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, that should not stop us from recognizing that you actually need the programs, the policies, all put together, and that's what makes a difference.
Mm-hmm. I want to bring a really important voice into this conversation because after Parkland last year, we saw young people really mobilize around this issue. And Sam Zeif is with us in the audience. He is a student. He was a student at Parkland last year. Sam, can you step up to the microphone, please? Thank you very much.
Hi, everyone.
Hi.
I'm sorry I'm late. It was a little over a year ago that I was sitting in a math class when I heard bullets fly through my hallways. And 10 minutes after the bullets started flying, I realized that my little brother was on the floor above me, and his teacher was murdered. How is this a true statement? How is this a true statement for me and other students all over the country? I lost one of my best friends. We should not be in this situation. It's amazing that we're all here to work out a solution, but it's all of us that have let ourselves get to this situation, and progress is being made. Background checks, it's great. It's a small step in where we want to go. There's a lot of things that need to be changed. The Second Amendment needs to be amended, and thank you. How are military weapons in the hands of civilians? And that's one great thing about Massachusetts is that you made that change. And we actually, from Change the Ref, an organization started by the father of my best friend, he actually has a billboard, and it says, if I went to high school in Massachusetts, I would still be alive today. Mm-hmm.
And why is that? Tell us why that is specifically, why you think that. Your best friend was Joaquin Oliver?
Yeah.
I'm so sorry.
Thanks.
So sorry, Sam. And the billboard was up last month for the 1-year anniversary of Parkland, and it did say if Joaquin went to high school in Massachusetts, he would still be alive today. Why do you think that is?
Because of policy, common sense policy, and laws and reform that you guys have gone through the effort to put forward. It's simple. And I don't know why the rest of the country isn't on the same page. Obviously, there's more that needs to be done, but you guys have the right mind.
That shooter never would have been able to buy a weapon in Massachusetts.
There's a number of things
but New Hampshire.
Right. Well, possibly, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Right.
There's a number of things that went wrong in our situation. Police were called to this shooter's home 39 times. Never once did any action taken. The FBI actually looked into his social media accounts for making threats, but they never did anything. The school expelled him for having social issues and whatever, but they never checked on him after expulsion. There's a lot of things that need to happen. He walked into a store underage and bought this gun. He was doing target practice in his backyard. There's a lot of things that needs to be forward, and I'm glad to be in a place where people can see that and that they've actually started that.
Now you're hearing from these folks, there's a lot of frustration on the federal level, right? There's not enough research. We don't know what Congress is going to do. You met with President Trump at the White House. You were among the students in that meeting. What did you take from that? And what's your message about what can be done federally and how possibly the state and the federal government might be able to work together? Do you have one from that?
That's a very good question. When I was in the White House, I read personally on Trump's card that says, I hear you, I feel you, And after reading that, before I even stepped out of that room, I knew that we weren't going to get help from him. And it's a year later, and he hasn't done anything. But there's there's a lot of things that can be done. And I think what I realized was that maybe it has to start at a local level. You know, there's power in numbers, and numbers have to start somewhere. And I just think it's common sense. Like, it's common sense. I just turned 19. I should not be able to go get a weapon in my hometown, which I can. And it's just, yeah.
I want to thank you so much. I think we'll ask you further questions during the program, but I'd like to hear from the governor and the attorney general about what you had to say. But thank you, and thank you for your continued work on this. We appreciate it.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Attorney General Healy. Attorney General Healy, what do you say to the student activists who are saying, you know, there's common sense here, but maybe work needs to be done on the state level going forward?
Well, sure. Work needs to be done on the locals, the state, and the federal level, and you guys are great. I was in D.C., in Congress, walking the halls when a bunch of your classmates were there, and it made a huge impact. It continues to reverberate, and just continue that advocacy. And I want you to know, Sam, that there's commonality of experience in the room tonight. I'm looking at my friend Greg Gibson, who lost his son to a mass shooting here in Massachusetts many, many years ago. Also in the room tonight, we have James Barden, who's a student at Northeastern. His brother, Daniel, was killed at Sandy Hook. And together, his dad and other parents founded Sandy Hook Promise. Our office partnered, put $1 million towards this effort to, Sandy Hook Promise did, to bring with our office training for 140,000 students here in Massachusetts. It's happening now, and what is it doing? It's teaching young people and educators how to recognize the signs of kids who are troubled, of kids who are alienated, of kids who are bullied, and then empower them with what needs to happen to move forward. So I just say continue your advocacy, because it'll drive good policy at the local, state, and federal level. Don't accept the nonsense, just reject the ridiculousness that you hear out there and that you have heard. And I am so inspired by our young people, cross race, gender, socioeconomic status, all over this country, who are speaking up and who are speaking truth to power. And the good news is the politicians are chasing them. One of the best things you guys did was refuse to endorse politicians or those running for office. I thought that was pretty cool. Make people take the votes, and then you can give them their support. But don't ride on promises. So welcome to Massachusetts, and thank you for sharing your story. We love Guac. Manuel and Patricia were at my swearing in, and we want to do everything we can to support you and families out there. Yeah.
So, first of all, I apologize for our weather. Good. Yeah, Joaquim's friends came, and his parents came and spent some time with us as well. And we also met with a group of alumni from the school who live up in this area. And to get back to the Attorney General's point earlier about the fact that trauma has a pretty wide net. And that meeting was incredibly emotional for them. They weren't there, but they knew people. They knew younger kids who were there. They knew the families that were involved. And you could just tell how big an impact what happened at Parkland was to them. I would say this, I agree with a lot of what the Attorney General said. The numbers matter in politics. And earlier we were talking about the fact that the worm is starting to turn on some of these conversations with respect to gun laws. The other thing I got to tell you that's important that you brought up is the importance for not just law enforcement agencies, but also educational institutions to talk to each other. And if they have a big concern about somebody who they worry is heading off the rails, to do something about it and find a way to engage that person or that group and see if they can't figure out some process to sort of bring them back. And I think one of the things, that's one of the biggest lessons of all that's come out of a number of these instances is why did people miss a whole series of pretty serious signs that something was we actually did we filed some legislation that you folks funded last spring to try to enhance and improve the quality of the social service and mental health services that are available in our schools. Because the biggest thing we heard from a lot of the folks in our schools was we need to have more capacity to actually hear what's going on inside our schools and then act on them when there are particular kids who seem to be spinning out of control. So I would argue that you are definitely leading a conversation that's heading in a direction you want to go, and there's stuff that's happening. The speaker mentioned the fact that post that horrible tragedy in Las Vegas, there were a number of states, Massachusetts was first, that passed laws outlawing bump stocks. And there are a whole series of states that have passed ERPO laws. Obviously, there's more that needs to happen there as well. But I think progress is being made here, and I do think the conversation is turning. I would love to see every state adopt the law enforcement local level sort of check on the process that we have in Massachusetts. I mean, who cares more about the safety of a community than the chief of police? And I think in some ways, you know, when we talked earlier about if there's like one thing, this is a local thing. Try and get every community in the state of Florida, state of Massachusetts, state of whatever to adopt that.
We actually have a question about that from Twitter. Are there concerns about police chiefs being the gatekeeper given problems with racial bias involving police? What do you say to folks who might have questions about that and whether the police chiefs should be the gatekeeper?
Yeah, so in Massachusetts, if you believe that your process has been, or the decision that's been made is unreasonable and not founded based on any data at all, you can appeal that one and take it to court.
Okay.
And it's fairly...
Victims of gun violence in black communities that get ignored every day. So I appreciate Parkland, but there's a whole missing piece to this conversation. If you are a black and brown kid that I bought from Dorchester, Roxbury, Mattapan, stand up, stand up. Like, we have a young lady here whose mother was shot. I stood and watched somebody put a gun to my son's head. We can't have the conversation of making it to the school to get shot because they're getting shot before they even get to the school. We can't walk to bus stops. We can't stand at bus stops. We take Ubers to go to school. We're doing group transport. We dodge bullets for a living. There's a missing piece to this conversation. And this is not an either or, this is an and also. This is, yes, this is happening in Parkland. Yes, this is happening in Vegas. But Dorchester, Roxbury, and Mattapan, in fact, yesterday somebody was shot, dodge bullets on a regular basis. And that's the voice that's missing in this space. Because I am representing violence in Boston. I post every shooting and every stabbing that happens in these cities on a regular basis, even when mainstream media does not cover it. And it is, we're dealing with PTSD shooters. Every shooting that's happening right now is a young person who has watched their friend be shot in the face and didn't receive services. Trauma response lets us know that when one person is shot, up to 100 people are affected. So then we're sending our young people back to Dorchester and Roxbury without trauma response services, without help, and without resources. That's the conversation that needs to transpire. So while I appreciate everything that y'all are in here saying, there's a missing piece and there's a gap. There's a gap on that panel. There's a gap in this room because we are here and we are fighting. And no disrespect, but we were screaming way before Parkland. Your comments. I appreciate you coming to contribute to this discussion, and we definitely do want to include your voice in this and what needs to be done about gun violence in urban areas. I'd like to include you as we continue the conversation. Unfortunately, the governor and the attorney general have to leave at 7 o'clock, and it's almost 10 past, and they told us that before the event started. So they are going to have to leave, and we're going to ask Nestor and Sam to join us on stage for more of the questions. But we would like to ask the speaker and some other folks about some of your concerns, if that's okay with you. Is that all right? Okay, great.
And Deborah, I'm leaving, but I just want to say, part of this goes down to, I'll be real honest, how we as a society have valued life and which lives matter. And I think that that is really the name to the game, and that's why disproportionately Black and Latino communities have paid a real price. It's up to all of us to make sure that there is equal treatment under the law. It's something that all of us are sworn to uphold. And you know, my heart goes out to, as I know I share the sentiment of everybody up here, my heart goes out to everybody in communities. Nobody in this state, nobody in this country should have to worry about their kid getting on a bus, walking to school, going down to the corner to buy milk. It's as simple as that. So let's work together, okay, to do everything we can. And to all the young people who showed up tonight, it's awesome. We need you. Keep speaking up, keep speaking out, keep showing up, and make sure that everybody is registered to vote to hold people like us accountable. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Attorney General. Thank you, Governor Baker. Thank you for coming. And hopefully we can continue the conversation, because I'm sure we will.
Yeah.
It sounds like we've got a lot to talk about. So thank you very much.
We will.
Okay. Thank you. So, yes.
Is Vickiana here? Oh, come on. Vickiana's supposed to be here.
Oh, no. I thought that she wanted to ask questions of the panelists, but she's welcome to come up and talk with us, certainly.
Yes.
Okay. Is it Monica? Is it Monica? I can't see that. Monica?
Yes.
Okay, well, come up and join us. Well, thank you. You've changed the whole panel, so thanks very much. I was going to ask Nestor Ramos first, because he did a long editorial project in the Boston Globe about steps and ways to help save lives. I'd like to ask you to just reflect on that a little bit, Nestor, and then we'll talk with Monica and Sam in our panel, and we'll take questions from the audience. So first, can you tell us the name of your project, 7,000 Lives? What does that mean?
Right, that was, I don't have a microphone, so if you can't hear me, please. We're getting it. Okay, good. The idea was...
Can you hear him okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
We ran the data, the CDC data on gun deaths, and calculated how many people would have lived if every other state had the same gun death rate as Massachusetts. Now, that's not, thank you. That's not necessarily the same thing as having the same gun laws, but laws are the best tool we have. So the 7 steps that we came up with are the kinds of things you've been hearing about here tonight. Putting police chiefs like Chief Ryan in charge of licensing decisions at the local level, and consumer protections for gun purchasers, and better background checks like we have here in Massachusetts. In a lot of states, there's no licensing requirement at all for an assault weapon, for example. Massachusetts, you need a license of some type for any sort of gun, where a chief like Chief Ryan can decide. For us, because the Globe typically addresses our local and regional audience. We're a New England newspaper. In this instance, we were talking more directly to other states around the country. And so what we did with the project was have a team of developers create individual, unique pages for each state, and read people's IP addresses as they logged in, so that if they were reading it in Alabama with one of the highest gun death rates, they would get tailored data for Alabama about what their gun death rate is and which of these 7 laws they have in place. I think it's 0 in that case, but all over the country. So that was one of the things that made it unique. But the Globe has had a long-standing commitment to this issue, and it wasn't the first time that we've given over that real estate to this issue, and it was something I was very proud to be a part of.
What's the main, if there is one, what's the main step of the 7 that you think would be most feasible, most practical to be something nationally implemented going forward?
Well, I think that's sort of in the eye of the beholder. I agree with what everyone's been saying, that one of the critical things, and it's also critical for starting to stem the tide of urban violence, is cracking down on these guns coming in from other states. So broadly, I would say it's, from the Globe's perspective, the thing that we're uniquely able to do is trumpet that message that Massachusetts does this well, right? We're pretty good at bragging on ourselves here in Massachusetts, sports teams to our governor, and so people can be sort of deaf to that. But I think the best thing we can do is convince other states that we're doing this right in some measure, and that they should follow suit. That's a challenge because, like I said, it's not all about laws, right? We have big sort of cultural advantages in Massachusetts. We have big healthcare advantages. There are a lot of reasons our gun death rate is lower than anybody's. It's not just what the speaker and the legislature can get passed. Our gun ownership rates are much lower. Our suicide rate is much lower for reasons that have nothing to do with laws or little to do with laws.
Right.
So as far as one magic bullet, if you will, I don't see one other than spreading this sort of gospel of Massachusetts more widely.
Yeah, yeah. Monica, since you're here, and Nestor spoke about, certainly what we've been hearing most of the evening is that Massachusetts is doing a decent job. You're laughing. How come we're not?
So one of the things that I learned is when I initially started this fight, I was fighting with emotion. People rarely listen, so I began to fight with data. The data shows that when elected officials, law enforcement say crime is down, they're not lying, but they're mincing words, right? They're picking and choosing on how they structure the data. So crime is down in areas where it was never up to begin with. In Newton and Wellesley and Brighton and Alston, where things rarely happen. In communities of color, not only is crime up, teen homicides have doubled, and it's not even an uptick, it's just a steady increase. The other piece that I wanted to touch on is I hear a lot of talk about legislation. For communities of color, legislation is a part of it, but that's not our issue. All the guns in communities of color are illegal, every last one of them. So regardless of how many background checks, regardless of how many legislation we pass, that's not our issue. The other piece is stricter gun laws strategically discriminate against Black and brown people obtaining their license to carry. So it actually does not help us in any way. The issue that we have is where the guns are coming from. The states that are around us that are laxed, straw purchasing, but then also the instances where law enforcement has provided firearms to the young people in communities of color. And that's the part of the conversation that we shy away from. It's not attractive, and I get that. But if we're gonna have this conversation, we have to have the real conversation, right? There's this narrative that gets created when gun violence happens in communities of color, that Black and brown people are not cooperating, which is false, right? There is a narrative that when things happen, we're not talking to the police officers. That's also false. Actually, people are talking to police officers and still nothing happens because their interaction with law enforcement is not well, mainly because a lot of the law enforcement that is sent into our communities are unfamiliar with our communities. And so they come in and they police our communities from a place of fear without actually talking to us. And one of the things that I like to reference is, and I don't know how old people are in the space, but there was a period of time in the city of Boston called the Boston Miracle, right? It was a hashtag that we had, and during that time, crime decreased a significant amount. The issue is that during that time, the efforts were not police-led. They were community-driven. It were community members and activists going into communities, talking to community members, and then bringing in police officers and policy holders to help with the solutions of the problem. Right now, what we do is we keep funneling money into law enforcement, and then we wonder why it's not working, because that's not how the problem was solved initially. The other piece is everybody around the country is using Boston's model but us. California uses it. Virginia uses it. Everyone uses Boston's model around violence prevention, but we don't use our own model.
So what do you think, what should be done?
So first, I think you need to talk to the people closest to the problem. I appreciate every legislative enforcement in this room, but none of y'all dodge bullets for a living. And that's the truth of the matter. I think that there are people like myself, and I don't want to be the hood or the Negro representative, but there are people like myself who do this work on a regular basis, who are out here advocating for families. me myself have literally, with the help of some of the people in this room, have fundraised to place young men in hotels outside of the city to keep them safe after they've been shot in front of their home because they can't go back home, and then reached into the city of Boston to ask for help just to be told that if they don't cooperate with law enforcement, they're not getting resources. That's problematic. Victim resource benefits were allocated, and I believe the law has changed. I'm not sure. Maybe Rep. Tyler or Rep. Miranda can correct me, but there used to be this stipulation that if you were deemed part of your own demise, you wouldn't receive benefits in regards to victim resource benefits. I'm not sure if the law has changed, but that's problematic because every time a law enforcement officer or anyone gets in the media to talk about what happens in our community, everybody's getting involved. So then that automatically stops how many resources you get. Then the hospital uses that same criteria, so you don't get home health aid services, you don't get a nurse. We don't get to use PTSD. And I think that's the biggest issue. So there's a social piece. Violence is a symptom of poverty. Roxbury is 33% below poverty level. 78% of households are led by single-parent women.
I want to let some of our panelists respond to a lot of the information that you had there, but I also want to remind our audience we've only got about 35 minutes left here. If you do have a question, that microphone over by Monica is going to be available for you to ask a question. If you want to stand over there, we will take questions shortly. So who would like to?
Can I just follow up
okay,
on
House
that?
Speaker DeLeo, let's talk about resources.
Bringing this to our attention. One of the things that I wanted to mention, and I mentioned it in my opening remarks. I mentioned in my opening remarks about the need for us to take a look at, you know, what was going on, especially in the urban settings. I talked about the fact about in Boston, the double the amount of youth homicides from one year to the next. I talked about the need for us to take a look in terms of economic inequities and behavioral health. And I have to tell you, you know, we've had some of the new reps that you just referred to, the reps Tyler, Miranda, Cullinane, who represents primarily a black community as well. Rep Santiago, I can tell you, have done an extremely excellent job in terms of bringing to my attention and to the members of their colleagues exactly what you're talking about. And so one of the things that I had mentioned, again, at the beginning, for us to take a look at those root causes. Yes, there's no doubt about it that those mass shootings, that's going to be in the front page of the paper, okay? But as I said earlier, if you take a look every day, every other day, okay, may not be on the front page, but it's there in terms of what's going on, especially in our areas. So I think there is an appreciation. And Esther, I think that there is sort of what we've done here in Massachusetts that has made a difference. I know you sort of referred to maybe that there are other factors, and sure there are other factors in terms of, but let me say, in terms of what we've done in Massachusetts, having the strongest laws in the country has made a difference in terms of safety here in our great state.
Not for the black community.
I wouldn't dispute that. That's why I wrote the piece. I just think it's slightly more common. It's not a panacea, and I think for the reasons that Monica's discussing.
Right. It's not a situation of us saying that you guys haven't made strides. I'm actually agreeing with you. We have some of the strictest gun laws in the country. What I'm saying is it does nothing for the black community. That's what I'm saying. What I'm saying to you is that we have to go a step further than just policy and legislation. We have to realize that there's a social piece to this that has been happening for an extremely long period of time. So what I'm saying to you is we have to actually go into communities of color, which is not attractive for a lot of people, and realize that there's a social piece. There's so many things as a person of color that I want to be a part of. I want to fight for climate change. I want to fight for housing. I want to fight for everything, but I got to pick which fight I'm going to fight because I have so many at this point. We're facing gentrification. We're facing homelessness. We can't breathe. So I'm agreeing with you saying, yes, we're doing great, but we can do these of color.
Right. John Rosenthal, you look at policies around the country. What do you say to Monica when she brings this up and says, yes, there are laws, yes, there are strong laws, but we've still got a problem?
Right. I mean, we have a problem because with respect to access to firearms, they're unregulated in this country. I mean, so what we really need is universal background checks and to replicate the same gun laws that we have here in Massachusetts in every state. Because if you compare Boston with Baltimore and 700 homicides in a year versus, Massachusetts, Boston, which is, far less, we're doing a better job because gun laws save lives. I am not taking a position that there is not way more to do. What we set out to do, Monica, with respect to gun laws here is try and make it harder for people who shouldn't have access to guns to create a model that other states could replicate, because 2/3 of all gun crime happens with guns that are traced from out of state, and we know. I mean, whether it's Kylie Harriet and it goes on and on and on, where people are going to Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont in particular, and bringing guns back into the inner city and using them in crime. So we have a lot to do, and there's no question that there's epidemic social inequity. But this event was really to try and highlight and showcase what effective gun laws can look like, and if replicated, like Nestor said, I mean, if replicated, if every single state had the same 3.4 per 100,000 population firearm fatality rate, that is 27,000 lives in 1 year. And those are white and black and Hispanic and kids and adults. So it's everybody. So, it's just a matter of trying to showcase and then highlight what strong leadership looks like. Because I can tell you from, and Speaker DeLeo just touched on it. I mean, getting gun laws passed in Massachusetts, you think that would be easy. It was harder than raising taxes. I mean, it was harder than a lot of things. It's insane. And, when you think about gun policy in this country, and people not being empathetic about what it's like to lose a child, why is it that we have to learn the hard way? Why is it that it has to be our child before we get involved? Why does it have to be a suburban, I mean, Manny and Patricia Oliver, who are also my dear friends, fled Venezuela because of the violence, picked the best school system in all of Florida at Parkland, and their 17-year-old son was gunned down with an assault weapon made here in Massachusetts that in other states isn't even regulated. So, and we talked about James, and we also talked about the fact that 90% of gun violence of homicides is urban, and it is with handguns, and the mass shootings every day that happen in this country of 4 more people are largely with assault weapons. But these are weapons designed, they're tools. Yeah. They're designed to kill. And if we don't regulate those weapons and we don't regulate how they're sold, you're going to have an epidemic of gun violence. And where is it going to impact the most? Inner city and suicides, which is exactly what the numbers show.
Okay, I want to make sure that we have enough time for some members of our audience to ask questions. Yes.
Thank you very much for doing this panel. And thank you, John Rosenthal, for your long-term fight on this issue. I want to tell you a little bit about why I'm here. I'm from the leafy suburbs of Needham. I live in a wonderful retirement community. Happens to be the same community that the governor's father lives in. I'm here because a year and a little bit more, last February, my 16-year-old grandson came to me and he said, "Grandpa, I want to go to the March for Our Lives, but I don't want to go to the ones in Massachusetts. I want to go to Washington, D.C. Will you take me?" So we went. Well, it was electrifying. And the teenagers who ran that are just fantastic, and I've become a big fan of them. And so I wear their pin every day, March for Our Lives. Wow. And I get a lot of questions, so it's worth wearing this pin. So thank you for all your good work. But I come from an elder community, and we're convinced out there in Needham, in this wonderful retirement community, that elders have to act also. So we have a gun control or gun safety committee of elders at North Hill in Needham. In fact, the chairwoman of it is here. And we're trying to do our part. Okay, that's where I'm coming from. I've been listening to some facts and figures, and one of the ones that stands out for me is that 90% of gun injuries and deaths are from handguns. Well, that tells me we're being terribly distracted by all this fuss about weapons of mass destruction. Okay, so maybe we need to concentrate more on handguns. That's thing number one. Thing number two is, why do we allow Smith & Wesson to manufacture in Massachusetts that it knows are going to be used illegally? Let's clamp down on them. They're a wonderful company. They provide a lot of jobs, and everybody's going to raise that if we act against Smith & Wesson. But they're doing something that's wrong, and we know it, and we shouldn't allow it to go on in Massachusetts. And then the third thing, well,
Maybe just two.
I lost my train of thought.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you. Thank you.
And thank you for putting Monica on the panel.
Yep.
Deborah, I appreciate that.
Okay. You're welcome. Speaker
I'm
DeLeo.
also a big fan of WBUR.
Well, great. I am so glad. Thank you. Speaker DeLeo, I wonder, maybe his second point first. Well, I don't think there's really anything you can do about a private business like Smith & Wesson operating in Massachusetts, but what would you say?
I think the biggest issue is not so much the manufacturer in terms of the guns, it's the question of them getting into the wrong hands and what we can do to prevent them getting into the wrong hands. In terms of the guns, I think even John mentioned that he was a gun owner, so
Right.
to speak. So I think the discussion this evening, with all due respect, and I hear where you're coming from, and can understand where you're coming from. But I think the biggest issue that we have is in terms of making sure we can control the flow of the guns, what we can do at the federal level, if anything at all, and again, to stop these illegal guns from getting into the wrong hands. What we can do in terms of checking out what are the root causes for gun violence that we have here, as I mentioned earlier. I think those are really the key issues that we should be dealing with.
And we haven't mentioned the Second Amendment debate and making sure that Second Amendment rights aren't disregarded here. What's your defense of that, do you think, when you're doing this kind of thing?
The Second Amendment, I mean, I can tell you through, especially from some of the folks from the NRA and whatnot, that was the major argument that
Right.
they would make, in terms of the right that people have relative to own guns. It's my feeling, and I think of some other more legal scholars than I, that the Second Amendment really has nothing to do with this argument at all.
Why?
It's just something that is thrown out there, but I understand the right to protect yourself, but this isn't what this debate has been all about. It hasn't been about the Second Amendment.
John, you want to say something?
Yeah, I'm chomping at the bit.
I
Sorry.
can tell.
Second Amendment, well-regulated militia being necessary for the security of the free state, the right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. And Scalia wrote for the majority in 2008 that does not protect assault weapons and sawed-off shotguns in particular. He said it protects weapons at the time of the founders. That is single-shot black powder. And so the Second Amendment, after every mass shooting, after every major shooting we hear, the Second Amendment doesn't allow for gun laws. Yeah, it does. The Supreme Court's already ruled. Then you hear it's mental illness. No. Every country has mentally ill people. We just happen to arm them with military-style assault weapons without detection. And so, and then you hear gun laws don't save lives. Criminals are all going to get guns no matter what. No, every single state with tougher gun laws has lower gun death rates. And with regard to Smith & Wesson, and all due respect, because I love this guy, and without this guy, we would not have our gun laws in Massachusetts. There is one primary leader in the state of Massachusetts on our gun laws, and it is Bob DeLeo. There is one person who is regulating and enforcing those gun laws, and that is Maura Healey. And there's a Republican governor who has signed those gun laws, and we've proven you can do it on a bipartisan basis. But I will tell you that Smith & Wesson came to the table in 1994 to be a part of the solution. And I got them to go to the White House, talk to Bill Clinton, and tell him that they could make a personalized gun that only the intended user could fire. They agreed to do it. They were boycotted by the NRA and the rest of the gun industry. At the time, they could also comply in 1998 with our consumer protection regulations, and they could sell the guns they make in Massachusetts. They've gone to the dark side. They're run by a group of private equity guys that are now making military-style AR-15 assault pistols. And if you want to understand what those things are designed to do, and the Globe did an amazing piece, that full-length, life-size AR-15 on the cover of the first the first 4-page wrap. The entry wound from 1.223 round is like that. The exit wound from 1.223 is like that. The 6- and 7-year-olds who were killed at Sandy Hook had to be identified by their clothing because they were indistinguishable looking. That weapon is being made in Massachusetts. It has no purpose whatsoever other than to kill a lot of people quickly. And I believe there ought to be a way, if you can't, we have consumer protection regs that say you can't sell those guns in Massachusetts. Maybe there's a way to have a conversation with them about, well, maybe you shouldn't make them, and if you do make them, then you've got to take more precautions.
Okay. I want to make sure we can get to audience questions. And because we have so many folks lined up, I want to just remind you to please be as brief as possible with your questions so we can try to get everyone in. Next question, please. Question?
Hello.
Hello. Thank you.
My name is Gabriel Petit.
Hi, Gabriel.
I'm 16 years old. I come from, I used to attend the McKinley. It's an alternative school based upon like behavioral students who have like not academic help or who need academic help, but like have help upon the streets. Like sometimes they are street kids, like they don't come to school. I won't label them as that. I label them like really as black students. Like I could say I'm a young nationalist. You feel me? I could say like I'm a young black person, a good black person. I feel like my question is, why do we talk about the guns and not the people? We focus more on the guns, but we ain't really focusing really on the people, like for real, like the people. I agree with Monica. We go through a lot of stress. We go through homelessness. We go through gentrification. We go through a lot of trauma that happens inside our community. But why would we focus on guns? That's an object, something you can use. Anybody can use in this room.
Right.
But we're gonna focus on the object that we can't change. We can change how we use it, but we can't change this. We can't change these people. We can actually change these people, but we want to change how we use the gun.
What do we need to do?
I feel what we need to do is focus on young black kids. Young black kids. Young black kids. Young black kids. I want y'all to say it for me. Young black kids. Young black kids. You feel me? You feel me? We like, I feel like a lot of things are stereotypical. Like the way people view young black kids is stereotypical. Like I feel like a threat walking in a community like this. If I wasn't getting a ride home, I'd probably take the trolley home. You feel me? I don't know. But it's like, I don't know. It's like, I think I would have to take the trolley home. You feel me? You feel me? Like, I'll let the next person go.
So Gabriel, wait a minute. Gabriel, you've got a bunch of policymakers up here. I want you to tell them, when you tell them to focus on black kids, tell them how. Tell them what they need to hear from you
I'll tell you.
Okay,
It's okay. You ain't a policymaker. What are you? So who makes moves on this stage?
I'm the only one who stayed.
Well, you know what I think you should do? What I think should happen for youth? Well, I'm gonna include white, black, you feel me? Everybody. I feel like we should focus on people. I feel like we go in the opposite direction. We running that way, and the goal is like that way. Like, why are we focusing on guns? That's an object. Like that's what I'm trying to say. Like, we can't really change objects. No matter what you do, If that person wants to go do something with that object, that person will do that. It's the person you change. You don't go, I don't know, it's like people think about this like politically, democratically. I don't really know the definition, but it seems like y'all really be going backwards with it. You feel me? I don't mean to throw shade with nobody. You feel me? It's just the way that I'm feeling, because I felt targeted entering somewhere like this. You feel me? Somewhere, I didn't see my face like this. I don't see my face. I look straight direct. I don't see that. That's my friend right there. You feel me? I know him, but I don't really see nobody that look like me. You see?
Right.
I feel like that's the automatic threat to a black kid, a black person, some people who don't look like him. And automatically, when you don't see people who look like you, no matter of fact, I'll let my people speak. What you talking about?
Oh.
I can't be taking my people's time.
Hold on one sec, because this woman was waiting.
Yes, Gabriel's, thank you very much. Okay, Gabriel, thank you. I want to say thank you.
And just, I need to say that the United States has more gun violence than the 26 industrialized nations combined. So, we're all humans in every country, but our unrestricted access to guns is what's killing us. I mean, if it weren't guns, you'd have knives, but you wouldn't have drive-by knifings.
All right, next question.
My name is Ann Grammer. I represent GAG, Grandmothers Against Gun Violence, on Cape Cod.
Okay, yeah.
And I feel the bottom problem, and Senator Daniel Wolf, the former senator, and I agreed 100% on this, unless you deal with poverty. Poverty is at the root of it all. Because if I don't have to worry as a poor person about housing, about a job, about where is a person paying my education, I would not even dream about thinking of straw buying a gun. So poverty is at the root of it all, and you need to address it. And how do I know it? I went to Dorchester and Roxbury and met a group of all African American women who looked at me, and I was the odd woman out. And they asked me, "What are you doing here?" And I said, "I'm here to learn and to make friends with you. We're all women. We have all the same problems, guns and drugs. And they are as evident on Cape Cod as they are on the inner city. So we need to, what this young man said, I want to see black politicians up there. I want to see black fellow human beings here. And the bottom line, ladies and gentlemen, it is about people. And what this young man said is one sentence: why don't you talk about people? Because people we can change. The gun we can't change. All you do is pull the trigger and you kill somebody. We need to come down to a people-to-people business again. And that's the gun issue, but wrong with the country. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing. What an incredible story. You know, there are a lot of different proposals to look at some of the issues, and I know that the Boston Police Commissioner, for example, proposed fining and pounding cars that are involved in illegal gun crimes and using that money to fund programs, inner city programs, youth programs to try to help. Is that something, are there sort of out-of-the-box proposals like that going forward that any of our panelists would like to chime in on here that might address some of these other issues besides just going for gun control laws?
So one of the things I want to highlight is that Massachusetts is the nonprofit capital. We have programs. Programs is not an issue. Consolidation is the issue, right? So for instance, specifically Boston, I can only speak from where I am, we have a whole bunch of nonprofits. Actually, I heard someone mention the Shannon Grant. It's ironic you mentioned that, because there are about 25 to 30 organizations, I think the governor mentioned it as a matter of fact, that receive funding from the Shannon Grant. For those who are unfamiliar, the Shannon Grant is for violence prevention, right? And what happens is these organizations are receiving money for gang violence prevention, but not each organization receiving money actually does the work of gang violence prevention, right? So then they're receiving this funding to do this work, but they're not working with the actual individuals that need the resources. When we're in a room and we have young people like the young people I brought with me, these are not the young people that are gonna shoot up a city block. We need to actually be talking to the shooters. When I was a youth worker, my job was to sit in superior court and gun court and advocate for the shooter. And I know that sounds crazy, right? But when you go into the shooter's home, there's just as many disparities as there are in the victim's home. We're not doing that. What we're doing is funneling programs that we know are not working. We have no assessment tool. There's no accountability to say who they're working with, what those outcomes look like, what are the success rates, what are the failure rates. We're not doing any of that. We're just dumping money in places that are comfortable, which is tied to politics. It is what it is. But the fact is that the people who suffer from that choice are Black and brown communities, right? So being that we have all these organizations, people are like, call this number. Okay, cool. When a young person gets shot, I gotta dial 15 phone numbers to figure out who to get help from. That's unacceptable, right? And I'm gonna give you an example. When the Boston Marathon happened, the tragedy that happened, Martin Richards was murdered at the Boston Marathon. When Martin Richards was murdered at the Boston Marathon, he received trauma services to his school. He received trauma services to his home. A police officer, a detailed officer, blocked off his street to allow his family to grieve. He received a lot of resources, rightfully so. So this is not an and or. I want to be clear about that, right? I live on a dead-end street in Roxbury that was shot up 15 times in one summer. My daughter is standing in the back and sat on the doorstep and watched me be shot in the face. We didn't get all that. So if we're not going to address the trauma and the PTSD from these young people, we're going to keep watching the increase of gun violence in communities of color. If we're not going to address the household that these young people are coming from, where there is a great disparity, we're watching development happen all across this city. We can't afford to stay here. The same people doing the construction on the development can't afford to live in the development that they're helping to build. That's problematic.
I want to make sure that we can get our last audience members in with questions, because we're running out of time. And if you do have a question that I can try to sneak, tweet us at WBUR, and I'll try to get that in as well. Next question from the audience, please.
Okay, my name's Jada O'Brien, and it's not really like a question. I just well, it is kind of a question, but I just feel like, why you guys, first of all, I don't understand why it's a smile on anybody's face up here. Second of all, it's just you guys are comparing us to other states or anything, but at the end of the day, we're our own state in our own city, and we go through our own, okay, so it's about to be 4 years since my mom and my dad have been, my dad was killed and my mom was shot due to a home invasion, and I don't, you guys are talking about gun control laws, everybody's over here clapping, but I don't know. I know it's a good thing, but it's not preventing anybody, and I don't know what the person what they went through that did it to my parent. I don't know what they went through, but people do go through their own stuff, and it's just you guys are focusing on the guns. You guys are focusing on the guns, but it's me. I was I could be in the streets right now. I could be doing anything right now, but I joined Teen Empowerment, and it actually it got in me away because I was really lost. You guys families are hurt from this. You guys don't understand, and you guys are. I don't think anything's funny.
Can we say what an inspiration you are?
Thank you.
You're as strong gets.
Thank
Seriously, you're real, and you're real strong, and I want you to keep talking, and thank you.
And people don't know, I don't know. I was I never thought it would happen to my family at all. And it wasn't even meant for my family. It was meant for the guy next door. So it's just people don't think about what they're doing. And I just feel you guys are sitting here focused on gun control laws. Everybody's sitting here clapping, but it's really nothing being done. It's 4 years now, but in March 31st. And we get, like once a year, we get, a letter to go to a victim's party or something. No, what is that doing? When everything happened and they couldn't find the people, they told my mom she needs to move out of Boston. They didn't give her anything. Like, I just don't understand what you guys think these gun laws are doing, because it's still people out here dealing with trauma and they don't know how to deal with it in the right way. Like, you see me, it took me a long way to get to where I am. I had to talk to therapists. I'm lucky I was able, I came from a family where they could provide me resources to get the therapy I need. And it's the only way I got to the point where I was, because I was honestly lost. So I just feel like these gun control laws, yeah, they're good, but there's people out here dealing with real life trauma and they don't know how to deal with it. They don't have nobody to talk to. So what are they doing? They're going to kill other people. They're going to just hurt other people, And there's people who actually want to make a change. So I just feel like you guys need to work with us and just stop focusing on these gun control laws. Actually follow up on what you guys are doing. These gun control laws are not doing anything for the cities, if you ask me, because my mother, I don't even think she could get a gun if she wanted to, with the back check and everything. She can't. So how can she protect herself? She can't protect herself. Any day, it could be anything, And I think about that every day, and it really did affect me. It affects me every day. And I don't know. You guys are up here just acting like, oh, we're this fine city, but the men who did it to my parents are gonna get released due to the police, messed up investigation, doing things they're not supposed to do. So at the end of the day, it's a lot of people that's not even in jail for crimes that they did, and it's just I don't know what this gun control law is gonna do for us, but.
Well, can I just say thank you for sharing your story so much. Thank you. Next question.
Okay. First off, my name is Ariana Constant Patton, and I'm going to say that again so all of you can remember that, because I know Monica does know me, but I want to say that a second time. So my name is Ariana Constant Patton. I'm 16 years old. I go to Boston Collegiate Charter School, and I'm a part of Teen Empowerment. Right now, I'm standing here. I spoke at March for Our Lives last year, so if I look familiar to you, that's where I'm from. And I want to understand why majority of the people who are on the panel before Monica were faces that were 10 times lighter than Monica's, rather than, besides Vickiana, because I know Vickiana was supposed to be here, but I obviously don't know where she was. But instead of asking people like us, youth, to come up on this panel, not just Monica, because there's more of us that really do have a voice in this and do have a say in what happens in our lives. Because regardless, we're all walking down the street to get to school, getting on the bus every single morning and going home every single night. Daylight savings just changed. On Sunday, we had to sit here and walk down streets in the dark at 6 o'clock at night, coming home from work and etc. And why none of us were on the panel and none of us were asked to be on the panel. And we $10 to get in here, that's a problem, because look at where we are right now. How am I supposed to get home and feel safe? If Monica didn't give us a ride here, how are any of us supposed to even get out here? That's a real question that I want all of you in this room to ask yourselves if you participated in to putting this together, because we're the kids that have to sit here and second guess about how we're getting home. And not all of us have money for those Ubers. So it is having to sit here and feel unsafe walking down the streets to get to the bus stop. It's those things that y'all aren't thinking about half the time. Y'all can sit here and go into your nice houses sometimes and whatever else and not have to worry about getting there because you have cars and you can drive your kids to school and etc. But we don't get driven every day. Last time I checked, my mom's, neither one of them have a car. So I want to just understand why Black and brown people, we're not specifically, besides Vickiana, we're not sitting here and youth, besides Vickiana, we're not asked to come to this panel. And I'm specifically asking this to you because I'm assuming you were in some coordination of the panel. And that's not saying anything against you, Sam, because I do appreciate you coming, because that says a lot. And I do commend every single one of you for your surviving this experience. But I am saying that more youth should be on this panel, because it's not fair to us to have to sit here and look at people that don't look like us, to sit here and talk about things that are affecting us.
And I can I can answer you about Vickiana. Sam and Vickiana were scheduled to give a presentation after the governor and attorney general had to leave early because they told us before the panel started that they did have to leave early, and we expected to do the student presentation then, but in the middle of this, Vickiana canceled and said she couldn't make it. I don't know why. I don't know how to answer that question.
I'm asking about us, though. It's not necessarily about Vickiana necessarily. I did not need to cut you off and be disrespectful, but it's talking about us. Yes, Vickiana was supposed to come, but that's not the point. What about there's hundreds of other, like Monica was stating, nonprofit organizations in Black and brown communities that could have sat here and took the time off to sit here and come here. So I'm just trying to wonder.
I think that the thrust of this conversation was lawmakers talking about gun control laws in Massachusetts and what happened in Massachusetts and what we know about research. And we also invited student activists, one from Florida and one from Massachusetts, to talk about what was happening in Massachusetts and welcome comments from the audience. So I think that was the way that we designed it. I wish we had time to include everyone in this really divided topic. I truly do. But I think we tried to be as inclusive as possible. But the focus is really gun control in Massachusetts and how we got to be the state that has the statistics that it does, acknowledging that there are problems and what do we do about solving those problems, and is there something we can do? It was not meant to be not inclusive.
Yeah, so often people think, and it was happened back in 1994 when we started this effort to try and reduce gun violence, that it couldn't be done and that laws wouldn't work. And in fact, we proved the opposite, that we were able to dramatically reduce gun violence. It's not, there's no one thing you can do, but we proved that laws could have an impact and lawmakers could feel safe in passing gun laws when it was always viewed as the third rail and radioactive, and that if legislators did it, it could have a positive impact and save lives. And literally, I mean, if we did nothing more, and there's lots more to do, but if we did nothing more than just the gun laws in Massachusetts, 27,000 more lives a year in this country could be saved. That is without getting into economic justice. That is these gun laws being replicated in other states and talking about it in a way that was safe for legislators who wouldn't pick up this issue. I mean, imagine if 8 people were dying, 8 kids were dying every day like they are from hamburgers. Do you think that the meat packers would continue to be unregulated? But the gun industry is continuing to be unregulated except for us, this state, and it needs to be replicated so then we can begin to talk about all the other issues.
And I want to just say something. I want to thank you. I really thank you, because I think you've added a level to this discussion that we really needed. And I want to thank you all for sharing your stories and for coming tonight, and know that this is an ongoing conversation about what do we do about this problem all over the community. And I want to invite you to be part of it as we continue these conversations. I truly do. So I hope you will remember and tell us how best to reach you so we can continue having this conversation. Okay? Yeah, I think you get the last question maybe. I'm not sure if we can get both of you, and we'll try.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So, hi everyone. My name is Carrie Mays. I'm a senior at Fenway High School and a youth organizer at Teen Empowerment. I'm also just a social justice activist warrior because I care about the hearts of humanity. I just turned 18, and before my 18th birthday, my life was almost taken away. As Ayanna Presley stated, the ones closest to the pain should be the ones closest to the power. As the bloodshed of my brother stained the sanity of our mental's mosaic, my wish is to make it to 18, quotes the average Boston black teen. How can I go to school in peace, seeing guts spilled behind a yellow tape out on the concrete? Gloomy mindsets roam throughout the public school halls. Metal detectors scan my humanity before I walk in the door, but I'm still quite not sure if it's for my safety or to perpetuate the perception that I am a criminal. Yet there was a stabbing in the basement of my little brother's high school where there were actual metal detectors to quote unquote protect him. The day of coming for my godmother's funeral and the day after my birthday. A trigger, a police officer, 5 police officers held a gun to my head and my grandmother's head and my mother's head out of mistaken identity. Finger on the trigger, shaking. In this case, institutions and media outlets need to be held accountable for when underrepresented voices are not being heard, so that all voices be heard. It is only right that those who are directly impacted by the tragedy are the ones telling the story. The victims deserve to be the #1 priority of the perspectives, and thank you for speaking tonight just as much as everybody else. How do we diversify? This is my question. How these conversations to be more inclusive so that we can make collaborative decision-making on the solution of gun violence? How can we change the conversation from being stuck on restricting a type of gun from coming into the state when there's already a bunch of illegal guns killing off Black and brown lives right now at this second, and not just lives of Black and brown children, but just human beings? Thank you. My name is Carrie Mays.
Yes, go ahead. We've got just a little bit of time left.
I'll just talk from here. Hello, my name is Ariana Jones. I am a senior at New Mission. I have 2 things to say, and I'll be really quick. One, a solution from piggybacking off of what, I forget his name, Gabrielle said, as far as talking about what we should do for kids dealing with gun violence. I feel like that it has to do with trauma. I feel like that when we are handling these situations, we're focusing more on the victim, but we also have to focus on the perpetrator, because they are dealing with something far, if not worse, than the victim, because it had to push them to do something to the victim to be in the situation to begin with. So I would say have more effective trauma responses, because we have trauma responses, but they're not effective, and they're not doing what we would think they would be doing with our community. Secondly, I would just like to say that when Ariana was speaking, you stated that this panel was mostly gun violence, which is why we couldn't have Black and brown kids on the panel. But it's way deeper than gun violence in our communities. So when we are dealing with it, it's more like the guns is being distributed in our community. So it's not like it's not a conversation on this topic, because they're being dished in our communities, which is the reason of why we have to be victims and why there's perpetrators, because they're dealing with I'm sorry, I don't remember your name, but poverty. They are dealing with poverty, and from poverty, you're searching for how to live your everyday life, getting basic necessities just to live. And that comes with the guns, because they're being distributed in our communities, and they're like, this is the only way I know. Plus, I'm hurt, so this is my way of getting retaliation,
right.
Feeding my mouth, having cold on my back, while protecting myself. Thank you.
Well, thank you. You know, I think that what we see here tonight is inspiring. I'm inspired to see so many young people who feel so strongly about this issue. And I think, as we said earlier, we will continue to have future conversations about this, I'm sure. Obviously, there's a lot of interest, but I think it's imperative for all of you who are here tonight to keep talking, keep the conversation going. That's what we're here for. We want to keep it going as well. We do not want to exclude anyone. We will include as many people as we possibly can, but you are really an inspiration, Sam, all of you, Monica. So really keep it up and tell all of us your stories and what you need, and policymakers, researchers, John Rosenthal, Nestor. Thank you all so much for your work, and let's keep talking. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you so much. By DOR.
By requesting even larger sums of money for a wasteful and inefficient border wall. I don't know what the president is hoping to accomplish with this request.
The president's